All right. Hi, buddy. How's it going? I thought I'm going to jump on here. It's Friday. Let's talk about something. I want to have this as a relaxed podcast where I'm going to show you something about the skills matrix that I created, because I was thinking this week about junior data engineer, senior engineer, architect, and machine learning engineer. Like, where are the skills, or what's the difference in the skills? So that's what I'm going to show you in a sec. Just going to wait if a few people actually join in here. All right, I can see people. Let me know in the chat if everything works, if the sound is okay, and so on, or if I should change something. Yeah. As always, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. We're going to talk about it. Let's dive right into it. Let's dive into the matrix. That's actually a cool thing. Let's dive into the matrix. This was something I posted that on LinkedIn 2 days ago, version 1. And with your comments, I made some improvements on it. And I added a few stuff that I thought was interesting. So, yeah. Hi, sound is crisp. All right, great. It's fine. Hi, Albert. Okay, so let's dive into it. How I do this stuff always, I use my Miro boards, which are these dynamic boards that are really big and where I can play around and then create images also out of it and download it and put it somewhere. So the idea was that I had when I created this, that I started out with the roles: junior data engineer, senior data engineer, data architect, and ML engineer. With your feedback, I actually split these two, senior data engineer and architect, because I was thinking to do these together, but it's I think these are two different roles generally. I created here in the first row a minimum experience. So that's why I put these two here together, because I was thinking of having a plus 5 years of experience for these two, senior data engineer and data architect, because you need a lot of experience in this stuff. That's why I initially put them together, but it made sense to actually split these. Senior data engineer next to as data scientist. And okay, we're going to talk about that later. That sounds like quite a career change. So let's stay on topic here. So I split this into these. Junior data engineer, I think, should be 0 years, right? Because you're a junior, you should not have experience as an engineer, or do not need experience as an engineer there to join. As we know, sometimes when you look at job descriptions, it looks like even junior data engineers need to have years of experience, which I absolutely don't like. This is not good. It's absolutely not good. Yeah, 0, in my opinion, then data engineer 2 years, where if you work as data engineer for 2 years, I think you can fairly say that you should be a good engineer there. You have learned the tools, you have learned how to behave yourself and so on. So 2 years. For senior, 5+, as an architect, 5+. And machine learning engineer, I think this is a lot comparable to the professional data engineers, so I put there 2 years, 2+ years. Maybe I need to. What's your experience in that? Do you also see that junior engineers that it looks like junior engineers have a lot or need a lot of experience in the beginning? Yeah, that's something that I see a lot, but maybe you see this differently. Put it in the chat. So we can talk about that. Then I was thinking about, okay, what about main work here? Main work, what's the main job tasks of these roles? As a junior engineer, implementation, right? You are working on problems, you are implementing some functions, some pipelines. As a data engineer as well. As a senior, this is where you get more opportunities to do other stuff, like implementation, design a lot. Very often you have agile management there. That has also something to do with the next step. But like that's something that is a real difference here. You're not only working on the implementation, you're also working on the more high level stuff. You're working on the design parts. I think that is important to understand as a senior engineer. Data architect, for me, that's more a design job. This has nothing to do with leadership and with implementation. I would say this data architect comes in, does some design, does some schema designs and so on. So, or platform design, that's not an implementation role. Generally, I would say I call this data architect. I also would target this or call this platform architect. Debugging for all level data engineers. Yeah. Debugging is a topic that is where everybody is working on. That comes also a bit further below, where we have software development here, right? This is where debugging and so on comes into play. But generally, main work, implementation. Senior engineer has more stuff also design and planning. Machine learning engineer usually also only does or focuses on implementation. Same thing goes for leadership. When you think about leadership, junior data engineer has no leadership. Junior data engineer is pretty straightforward because you lack the experience. As an engineer, you're collaborating with your team, but you're there to mentor juniors or to mentor how are they called? You know, the people that are usually in school and then they join a company to get some experience. How's that called? I'm missing the word. But I think you get what I mean. Sometimes the line between basic and advanced skills is blurred, like how you can define the difference between basic queries, complex queries in the context of data engineering. I think this is very much a case of if you see it, you know the difference. It's very difficult to define on that level, right? But let's get to that later. We're not there yet. Let's get to that in a second. Interns was what I was meaning. Like data engineers going to mostly mentor juniors or interns. Senior engineers are usually then or often leadership or leaders of the engineering team. Sometimes as a lead engineer. It always depends a bit on the naming. How this is. How people are naming their job descriptions, right? Data architect usually are doing mentoring for juniors, and machine learning engineer. That actually needs to be here as well. All right. Love that skills matter. Thanks, Adam. Thanks a lot. Software development. This is where we got to the point of debugging and so on. Junior data engineer. That I would say that's a mid-level developer. It's not a complete beginner. You need to have some development experience, so you are able to code. You're able to use Git and so on. that you're a typical developer. You know how to handle yourself. Most likely in one language or two languages. Then when you move to the engineer, that's somebody who is experienced in development. An experienced developer who knows languages, one or two languages in and out, and can very quickly figure out how to solve problems or how to debug problems. That's what I think. The next step, senior engineer, is the same thing but more. I would say experienced developer. The only thing experienced, when I think about this now, experienced developer, multiple languages, it could be that it's experienced developer in one or two languages, but knowledge of more, right? So you can, if you see something, you can understand it and read it, but maybe not develop it. So that's something. Experienced developer 1, 2. Let's do it 1 or 2 plus insight plus basics, multiple languages. Architect, that's what, with the architect, that's something where we were discussing in the LinkedIn post a lot about. I have here experienced developer. I had here just experienced developer. Now it's experienced developer, not needed, but nice to have. I still think if you're doing architecture, if you're doing the planning, you have to know how to implement it. You don't need to implement it, but in my opinion, a good architect needs to also be a developer. So this person can visualize how would I solve this, or what will be the what tasks will the actual engineering then have to do later. Right? So for me, an architect should have some development experience. This is something we can discuss. As an ML engineer, also experienced developer. Let's take this and put this here. Then we had SQL. I try to keep this very generic, but I put SQL in here based on just on how are people working with databases. Before we get to that, let's add a few questions here. Let's answer a few questions. Come on, go away. What advice would you give a recent grad in applied math and computer science who wants to be a data engineer focusing on industry and IIoT? If you're at that stage, you need to practice. That's what I tell people always. That's where I built the academy around. You need to practice. You need to apply the skills, or learn the skills. You need to apply the skills by doing small projects. Could be in individual tools, could be also larger projects like I have in my data engineering academy, where you'll first learn the tools and then you apply all this and build a larger pipeline, a larger project out of it. That's what I would how's your name? See, that's what I would recommend for you. Now you learn the basics, you have the sheet with the certification on top of it. Now you need to show that you can actually apply that skills. You can learn new stuff and apply that. So that's where you should go now. This helps me to know a certain path data engineering. Very good. That's why I did this. All right. Great matrix. Thanks, Dean. So, as I said, SQL is more in terms of how are people working with databases, how are they getting the data, working with the data. For junior engineers, I called this basic queries and database design. So this is something a junior, in my opinion, needs to know how to work on a database, needs to understand how to join tables, needs to understand how to actually, or how a database is built, like with normalization and topics like that. So a junior data engineer can understand what is already there and can work with that. That's something that needs to be here. And let's put here understand DB design. As a data engineer, this is the next step where you actually do DB design as well. Right? This is not just queries. This is something you do more complex queries that span over multiple tables with mathematical functions in between, and where you can actually, if you, let's say, have a CSV file, you can build a relational database out of this. That's where an engineer comes in. That's also the step where a senior data engineer should be. So that's here. We could also add maybe performance optimization. I don't know. Let's put this here. Or let's just use optimization. Right? Data architect, I would say it's the same thing. The architect needs to understand that. Needs to know what to, because later it's about building the pipeline or designing the pipelines, using selecting choices, what to do, and evaluating tools. So that's something somebody needs to do. Yeah, ML engineer. As I said, ML engineer, I think it's more on the level of the data engineer. So that's why I have this here. Let's go further down. Let's go CI/CD, but I think, can I bring this down here? Yes, I can bring this down here. Okay. That stuff where I was thinking, okay, how are people going to then work as an engineer, right? How are they developing their stuff, their code? How are they deploying their code? And generally, when I think of a junior data engineer, junior engineer needs to understand, how can I test my code? How can I develop my code? How can I deploy my code into production using the tools that are there at hand? I know I want to keep this very general. So this is more of a usage thing. Then we have stuff like the data engineer, where we say, okay, the data engineer actually needs to understand, how can I implement a new CI/CD pipeline to this? So how can I implement a pipeline where when I code, I automatically do the integration tests? Is the code correct? Run the unit tests, and then automatically deploy this onto my platform. That's something a data engineer should be able to do, to understand, because of their experience of working with this. They should be able to actually deploy this, or think of, Same for the senior engineer. The data architect, it's more for design and less for implementation. Same goes for the ML engineer, just like the data engineer here, or the senior. Because you're going to build pipelines that help you deploy your machine learning models. So that's something where the ML engineer also needs to know how to implement these pipelines and use. Why do I only have implement here? This should also be, whoops. I need to, the spelling here I need to correct later. That's just, yeah. DevOps is the same thing. I was thinking when I did this, I was more thinking about ops, like that the junior engineer needs to understand, how can I do the ops, how can I do the monitoring for my pipelines, right? And how can I maintain my code? That's something that is very important for the engineer. Junior engineer needs to learn, how can I do this in practice? How is this done? This is a time of learning, of using what is there. For the engineer is implementation of it, of new pipelines. So there's a framework around it, and the engineer is using new pipelines for this. Let's say you're monitoring stuff with Elasticsearch. The junior data engineer is going to learn how to monitor and how to use what is there, maybe modify this a bit. The data engineer is going to go into implementation. So there is already an Elasticsearch running for the monitoring of statistics and of logs. There's a new pipeline coming. The engineer is going to be able to put the data into that pipeline and use or create that pipeline, put the data into Elasticsearch, build a new dashboard with Kibana or whatever, and be able to monitor this. The senior engineer, that also is same thing for the senior engineer, but I would say this is more strategy design. This is more, the senior engineer has more to do with what we're going to use of tools. How can we optimize our tooling? How can we optimize our monitoring in general for the ops? Right. So I put in data architect. I put the same, only again without the implementation part. For me, this is quite difficult. Senior engineer, data architect. This is a very flowing concept. For some people, the senior engineer also does the architecture, the data architect stuff in one person. In larger companies, you could have a split here. I'm going to talk about that in a second, bit more, but that's the difference here. Does the data engineer also need to be quite conversant with data administration? That is performance, security, database standards. Yeah, data engineer. Yeah, I would say security. I think we get here to security. I have on the list. That's something that is more of a. Do we have that here? That thing goes down here. Do we have platform security? Yeah, that's for implementation. Yeah. That's something that is coming. That is important. Database standards. I think that's something that is important for everyone. Administration. Yeah. Performance optimization. Yeah. So DevOps cloud platforms. That's also something that people get confused a lot, is does an engineer need to know every platform, or to what level do they need this? I think generally cloud platforms, as a junior, you need to understand one platform, a single one, and understand the key tools that people use all the time. How to build ETL pipelines there, how to do streaming there. So when I think about my blueprint, know how to ingest data, know how to use a message queue, know how to do a processing and the typical databases or data storages there. That's something also a junior engineer should know. That's why I also focus in my academy about, because I think that is important. So you very quickly get to the point. You start there, you start at a company, you already know a part of the tools, you only lack the experience to make that next step to the engineer, and that gives you a head start, and that's what you need here. For the engineer then later, I think that multiple platforms is a must. An engineer needs to understand multiple platforms, but Oh yeah, multiple platforms. I split that actually. Same for senior engineers and architects. The architect especially needs to be, I would say, needs to be the expert in these tools, because when you focus on a single architecture role or architect role, the architect not only works for a team or works on a single use case. Usually the architects move around in the company and help people actually do the architecture on different use cases, maybe different platforms and so on. So that's why I would say the architect, especially here, needs to have expert knowledge in a lot of these platforms. Tool knowledge, again, for the junior, basic knowledge of key tools. Engineer, advanced knowledge of key tools, because the engineer most likely is working also on a project and needs to know the tools in and out of that project. But then when you go to a senior role, to a lead role, this is where you need to have advanced knowledge of a wide range of tools. You can derive solutions across platforms. So you have a solution here on AWS. How can you build this on Azure? How can you replicate this on GCP? That's something that you actually need as a senior. Same thing as an architect. That's why I say these are. It's very difficult to split these. Yeah. How much domain knowledge do you need as a junior data engineer? Most bachelor degrees are too broad to a point where one does not know where they fit. That's actually a good point here. Let me quickly add that here. I'm just going to put this somewhere here. Domain knowledge. Okay, so for the junior, as you said, when you get out of university or when you start with the job, I would say only broad knowledge. Like when you're with banking, you start with banking, you should understand what a bank is going to do, right? You start that IoT in that IoT company. That has to do something with cars and sending data or analyzing data from cars. You should generally understand what's the source of the data, the car, how does that generally work, and then I think then you're good. As an engineer or in this part here, everyone to the right here, I think they need deep knowledge, or should we call this expert knowledge? Let's just call this expert knowledge. The thing is this, let's call this advanced here. Advanced knowledge, and this here is expert. Because how are you getting this knowledge? You're getting this knowledge because you work in that role, right? That's how you get that knowledge. So yeah. Advanced, Fred. Yeah, let's put advanced there. I think that's a good way of doing this. So where were we? Platform strategy. So from a strategy standpoint, junior engineers, data engineer, ML engineer, I don't think these people work a lot with strategy, with the whole platform design and so on. That's not their main job. As we've seen in the first row, their main job is implementation. Same for the machine learning engineer. So that's why they don't do a lot of platform strategy. That's the role of the senior engineer and the data architect. The senior engineer is most likely more hands-on, more implementations focused. The data architect, if you have the data architect as a separate role, most likely more focused on design than actually, yeah. on that. Data architect, data schema design, and so on. That comes further down here. So that was for platform strategy. When you think about pipeline design, that's something different, right? Because as a junior engineer, you need to design pipelines. No, you need to develop pipelines, right? There is somebody, usually a senior engineer or an architect, they are designing complex pipelines. I actually don't like that a lot here. So the junior engineer usually develops individual pipelines, because this gets down the chain. They develop. The data engineer usually develop complex pipelines. Okay, then the senior engineer, that's more about designing complex pipelines. With selected tools and be able to select tools. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And be able to select tools. The ML engineer also does design of complex pipelines. No, that's development. Yeah. Yeah. Select tools for these pipelines. Then we have platform design, usually design. Platform strategy. Why did I do this like this? Junior engineers don't do design. Platform design small platforms for basic problems. That's something an engineer should be able to do, where you get into a new team and you get a problem, you need to be able to design a small solution for this. Yeah. Pipeline design, platform design. I actually would need to have done this like this. As a senior engineer, design complex platform, distinct use cases end to end. No, I think that's I think now that I think about this, let's do it like this. Platform design complex for the data engineer, design complex platform for distinct use case. What I mean is a specific use case end to end, and senior engineer or architect, they need to understand how to do this for a wide variety of use cases. Yeah, I think I like that. I need to rearrange that window here on the right, otherwise I don't see comments anymore. There's a comment. Just a comment. One of the hurdles I have experienced from a company point of view, okay, the other side, not the employee, is the cost involved. So encouraging management to acquire licensing for more than one platforms become onerous exercise. So sadly, only one gets exposed to one platform, whether it be Azure, GCP, or AWS. Very often, yeah. I mean, it depends. It depends. So I think licensing is no longer the point with platforms. Let me focus here. So licensing is no longer the point with platforms. It's more the cost and the complexity. What is happening is that people are starting to use multiple cloud platforms, but then for specific goals. So you would have, for instance, on AWS, you have your main pipelines, your transactional stuff, and everything to solve the business use case, you might have that on AWS because it's a big thing and it costs a lot of money, and that's why you're there. But then you might have analytics use cases where AWS might not be the right choice for this. I'm always thinking about data warehousing or analytics data stores where people like BigQuery a lot more than Redshift, because Redshift also is a bit more expensive in the term of setting it up and not being that agile, because you have to reserve instances for this. Why on BigQuery is very simple to set up, it's serverless, it's very nice to integrate with Data Studio and so on. So people build their main use case on AWS, but the analytics stuff, they put that on GCP. And how to communicate in between, that very often is done via files, where you put the stuff into S3 and then GCP is actually picking up the stuff from S3 with ETL jobs and putting it into GCP. So that is that is a thing. It also depends on the company size. Some larger companies actually give you more freedom, but usually, you're a lot limited. I love the matrix. The only thing I'd add is a subsection of experience describing what they've done on projects. Project commit, something like describe the role, type of things. Who's getting some comments? Well known open source project. I think I need to think about that. Yeah. There's always this thin line of making this too complex and keeping this too simple, right? So your comment, actually, I need to think about this, how I can maybe implement pieces of this into this thing, because I want to keep this small. I want to keep this like every row 2 or 3 lines here in every cell, not make this big. So, but I get your point. I see where you're coming from. It makes sense. It makes sense. Maybe as an add-on or something. I'm going to think about that. Yeah. Pipeline design we had. Yeah, we had. And then let me bring this down here again. Data modeling, schema design for databases, for instance, and the individual steps that you need to take. This is something that, I don't know which question that was, data structures and so on. That's something that fits there a lot. Like actually modeling each step of the pipeline. This is where there are differences, right? The junior engineer most likely is going to do some simple modeling or changes to existing data structures, as I said, with the SQL design and relational databases. Is most likely going to be more of the, okay, I have something, let's change it, like let's add stuff to it. That's whereas the data engineer then is more for complex modeling for the use case from the ground up. So you have a project, the engineer can go there and can model this use case and has this use case very, very well down. The senior engineer and the architect, this is where it's more of modeling whole end-to-end pipelines. I don't know, is that? Yes, that the complex modeling of whole end-to-end pipelines and each of the steps, because you need to know that to actually do the architecture, do the design. But what's the difference here to the data engineer? What do you guys think in this? Should I? Because data engineers, they also do complex stuff. It's not like they do simple stuff, right? Complex modeling for use case from the ground up. I need to mark this here. This is, I don't know. Yeah, I need to think about this. Let me mark this yellow here. So, budget-wise, who is responsible for budget? Junior data engineer, absolutely not. The data engineer is responsible for the pipelines, because data engineer needs to make sure that he or she doesn't build pipelines that cost a lot of money and go over budget. So that's something. Senior engineer or lead usually is responsible for the whole team, right? So it needs to keep the data engineers in check, needs to have the numbers, understand the numbers, has a budget for all of this, needs to also work with them for the planning. The architect usually is more, I see the architect more of planning for the whole platform, not just for individual pipelines or individual teams. It's more for, okay, I have this platform, we're building this platform, and these projects, can we keep the budget? And what is the planned budget for this? Otherwise, if the budget is too low and the platform I designed, I need to switch tools or something, right? Also, ML engineer is like the data engineer, I think, pipeline responsible here. Hey Andreas, what is your thought on someone brand new to the data field going straight to data engineer? Would you recommend a more entry-level position like analyst? Great content, by the way. Thanks, Herbie. No, I would not go to analyst, or scientist. I would not go into these. If I want to become a data engineer, I would focus on the engineering. There is no stepping stone to engineering. So learn the engineering parts, learn how to get to that junior level of an engineer, and then apply for engineering jobs and learn from there on. Don't start as an analyst, because the analyst is focusing less on the engineering part. So making that switch then to the engineer will be very difficult, and makes almost no difference, I would say. The only thing that makes sense that you could do is making that switch here to the ML engineer part. That is something where, let's say you come from a data scientist position, then that you could do that switch. But from somebody who is new in the field, no, I would not go with this. Yeah. So budget, I don't know. So budget here, we have platform security. That's more a case of junior engineer is going to use and work with the platform security. Data engineer needs to understand, how can I implement something if I need to implement a new pipeline. Are there some rules and regulations for that? Senior engineer is most likely also going to do the design for this. So how can we implement security in the platform, in our pipelines? Data architect, the same with like senior, just without the implementation, and machine learning with the implementation here. Machine learning engineer. Basically the same thing I see for data protection when you think about GDPR and so on. The junior engineer is going to use what is there. If it's queries, but also light. Let's call this light implementation. No, I would, for security, I would not let a junior do. The professional role needs to do the implementation for this, not a junior role. And then senior, our architect are going to be doing design. Yeah. I think that's where this is coming from, where I'm going with this. How much weight would you put on understanding infrastructure as a code for data engineers? Let me quickly look something up. Infrastructure as a code versus because sometimes I get confused with the definitions. Managing provisioning computer data sets through machine readable definition files. Yeah. So infrastructure as a code, because I was thinking here infrastructure as a service. Where's the difference here? Yeah. So infrastructure as a code is something where you deploy infrastructure using code, using either using configuration files or using code directly. As a junior, I don't think that is very important as a junior. For engineers, though, this is important, because let's say you work on a CI/CD pipeline, you need to understand how can I, when I do an update, how can I bring down my current part of the pipeline and through code bring up the new containers and so on. So that, I think for an engineer, that is important. That is important. Where can I get this skills matrix? Once this is finished, I'm going to, once the stream is finished, I'm going to put this on my LinkedIn again. I'm going to do a post with, hey, this is data engineering skills matrix version 2. I put this there, and on LinkedIn, you can actually do a download of this. It's the easiest way I think right now to do this. So I'm going to put this in the description. Version 1, as that is already ready. Do you think a senior data engineer should know about project management in order to better control budget and people? Yes, absolutely. Do I have project management in here? I don't. Let's put project management here somewhere. Let's put this on the bottom. Let's put project. Oh, you're not seeing what I see. Oops. Let's put project management here down below. Project management. No. Yes. Project management. Let's just put yes here, and this they know. I don't know how to do this differently. What could we put in here? You should know about project management in order to better control budget and people. Yeah, I don't know anything else than put in here yes. Man, the questions are coming very fast. I don't know. You're talking with each other. I'm searching for you on LinkedIn. You also work at Nestle? No, I don't work at Nestle. I work at my own company at learndataengineering.com, where I teach data engineering. I used to work at Bosch Rexroth, but now I'm working on my own company. I'm my own boss, and I like it that way. So, yeah, where were we? Data protection. Yeah, here we were here. We're getting to the bottom. people, we're getting to the bottom. It's not that much anymore. We're almost done. Almost done. So APIs, I was thinking about how to get data in and how to work with data. And a lot of times pipelines have to do something with APIs. Use APIs or build APIs or implement APIs. I think APIs are very important for pipelines and also for scaling of pipelines. That's why I put this here as a separate row. For a junior role, let's be honest, it's usage. A junior role does not actually need to design APIs. It's nice if they understand it, but it's not necessary. For a junior role, it's a lot of usage. A data engineer, on the other hand, needs to do implementation and design. Usage, let's do usage and implementation and simple. Let's just do implementation here. Because how would they get to the engineer if they are not doing implementation? Data engineer is also doing data implementation, but also design. Same as the senior engineer, same as the architect, but only the architect is not doing implementation. And for the ML engineer, same thing. Then processing frameworks. This is where it gets. This is where it gets difficult because I don't want to mention individual tools here, right? It's very dangerous to use tools because it very quickly gets too specific. That's what I meant before. Gets too much into detail. I want to keep this very broad. I put in here. And the only differentiation here is, I think, is expert and basics. So as a junior engineer, you need the basics in software as a service tools, where like AWS Lambda or Azure Functions or Cloud Functions on GCP. You need to have basic knowledge of containerization. How can you create an image and host a container somewhere, and of different distributed processing frameworks like Spark, like somebody mentioned Glue in the comments before. That's I would say this basic knowledge of this. For a data engineer, that's where they get expert. We could say this. We could make a distinction here between advanced and expert, but should we do expert or an advanced here, so that these only how should we do this here? We could put here advanced. Then we have expert. Let's keep it like this. I'm not sure what to do here. I'm not sure. What do you guys think? I don't know. Data stores, that's where I was thinking more of. And now I need to reorder this. Usage and simple design of NoSQL stores. That's also something interesting here. So if there is a NoSQL database, like you have a key value store, the junior engineer should be able to use that data store and should be able to design simple databases with this. The engineer usually is then the next step, where they can choose. They can not only design these stores, they can also evaluate and choose or select these stores. Maybe not evaluate. I'm not sure. You see, this is where it gets difficult. use and choose the right. Because senior and data architect I have for evaluation of these. Right? They need to be able to evaluate and choose tools for complex problems in line with the strategy. Right? Where to go. The engineer needs to choose the right NoSQL store for. Let's use the available for distinct problems. So if you think about, okay, you're in the IoT field, you have time series data. The data engineer needs to know how to work with data, with time series databases, and design this a time series database, right? That's something. And they then need to be able to decide, to choose, okay, do I want to work with InfluxDB or with TimescaleDB or so on. The senior data engineer or the architect, they are able to understand, okay, which type of database is the best type for this, and how would we design this? I think that's why I put evaluate. I'm open to changes here. Put it in the chat. Put it in the chat. Let's do this as well. So then we have data lakes a lot. Junior engineers need to know how to use data lakes, how to implement a simple data lake where, okay, I need to have in my data lake a part where I store some files from projects. The junior engineer needs to know how to set this up. For the engineer, then advanced implementation. Should we call this advanced? Or just implement it? Let's just put implementation here. Let's call it complex implementation. Senior engineers, data architect, these are more for designing of this. How does that fit to the rest of the platform? And implement governance and lineage. So you implement the governance, who is responsible for what, who can access what, and that implementation is going to be done also by the engineer. And the architect most likely does not do implementation, only do the design of that. Yeah, let's do that. Let's use that. Then we have the collaboration. Engineer usually collaborates with the team. Data engineer with team and customers. Yep. And then the senior team, customers, also with the business leads to actually figure out where are the goals, where do we want to go, what's the strategy, and so on. So these two are more customer oriented as well, are more business oriented as well. And the same for the ML engineer, but the ML engineer also put more into the topic of with customers and especially data science teams. I think that's important here. What do I have? Then I have two more things. So any more? Can you agree with this? Should we put something else here? What are your thoughts on this? Does that make sense so far? I hope that makes sense. Put your questions in the chat. We're going to do after the next two. We're going to do a small Q&A round. If you have more questions, general questions. So then we have our agile development here. Agile development. Usually the engineer, junior engineer gets tasks assigned, right? And then the data engineer develops his own or her own tasks, where you know what to do, try to figure out the tasks and maybe give them to the junior engineer. And then the senior engineer manages tasks for the team, thinks of new tasks, keeps in touch with the business here, right, to figure out what to do. The architect is usually the same thing. Again, maybe without the team, because the architect is more working on as a solo person and working more on their own stuff. Machine learning engineer, I think it's the same thing as the data engineer here. And then we have the machine learning row here. This was actually harder than I thought, because so machine learning, how should be the understanding of that? Basic understanding of the process for a junior engineer. For data engineer, basic understanding of the process. Like how does training and application of machine learning models work? No, I don't like that. The senior engineer should have more complex knowledge of the tools and the processes. Same with like the architect. But the ML engineer should also be able to create own models. I think that's the big difference here. They have architect to junior engineer. They have basic knowledge, and the actual engineer, machine learning engineer, is so deep into the topic that they can develop their own models. They're a bit of a part-time data scientist. Let's call it part-time data. Let's call this part-time data scientist. Question mark. Yeah. Okay. That's it. Let's quickly. Would you be willing to share this? I think it would be super helpful as an HR professional who is working on creating a level guide for engineers. Mary, can you send me an email on LinkedIn if we're not connected? I'm going to send this to you as an image. Just let me know, or send me a connection request and let me know in the request that I want to send you this. No problem. All right. So with that, we're actually through this whole thing here. Let's see what other people think. I need to change a few things here. I think it's not perfect. Of course, it's not perfect, but it's a start, and I wanted to do this to give a bit more help to people to see how these roles differ. Yeah. Now let's see. Where am I in this matrix? Junior, mid, senior data engineer working in IT for 13 years in total. Has nothing to do with this. Linux admin. It's not engineering. AWS skills, okay. Container CI/CD automation in the last 6 years. Already created large batch pipelines. AWS 3 only for the last 6 months. Stakeholder management, project organization, data monitoring without any guidance. I was just learned about DBT and more advanced queries. I would say, Craig, I would say you're in this column here. You're in this column here. In the data engineer column. Because as you said, you have a lot of computer science experience, admin, DevOps, senior platform engineer. I'm not sure what that means. You worked with containers, CI/CD pipelines for the last 6 years. Yeah, that's definitely a data engineer. That's definitely a data engineer role. Yeah. Which programming languages would you recommend for one to start pursuing career path in data engineering? So why I'm laughing is because here I had in software development, I had Python here as a start, and people were like, "What? Python? No, not Python. Not every data engineer needs to know Python, and this needs to be software development." I actually agree with that. What I tell my students is start with Python. I would start with Python. A lot of people use Python. Let's say you want to go with on different platforms and you want to develop with software as a service tools like AWS Lambda or some stuff. You're most likely going to use Python for this. A lot of people use Python. They're very versatile in Python. So I would go with Python. If you're going with then at some point are going to get into Apache Spark and so on, I would also go with Python, do this in Python as much as possible, but it's fair enough. People think about Scala a lot there and would use Scala. So Scala, a JVM, a Java-derived language. I started with Java. And a few years ago, I was telling people that they should do Java and not Python for engineering. But from what I have seen over the years now, I actually think Python is the right choice here. It's the right choice. I quickly need to drink something because my voice sounds like it's going out. As much about programming languages. How do you see DBT growing in data engineering space, or is it gonna be staying in data analyst stack for good? How should I say this? So this typically where you would apply DBT is you have your data in a data warehouse or in an analytics database and you want to transform it because you have been doing a ELT pipeline where you just took the data from the external pipeline, external database or something, and you import it in your warehouse, and now you want to transform it. So arguably, this is a tool that is very analysts focused. But what we see is that the engineer gets more and more towards this job actually. That engineering does not just stop when throwing data into your analytics store. Engineers have to do more than just EL, the EL part from the ELT part, or simple ETL where they take the data from the source, put it into a table format and putting it into a staging table. The data engineer, the data analyst then needs to go into that staging table and transform the data. I think that's why I think it's getting more and more into the engineering space, and it's expected for an engineer to understand what to do there. Yeah. Do you think DSA is needed for data engineering? With these abbreviations. What's the DSA now again? What's DSA again? Any advice for project formulation for junior engineers, like problem statements and steps you expect to follow in projects for junior data engineers? Ooh, that's very specific. That's very specific. Project formulation. Please define formulation. What do you mean with that? Algorithms and data structures. Well, data structures in terms of from programming languages, you need to understand the data structures that Python gets you, or that you can do with Python. In terms of storage, you need to understand how the data is structured, or how to structure data to when you put it into different storages. What's the best structure? What's the most performance structure? That's something that you need to work on. Algorithms. There are people that say you need to have a lot of algorithm knowledge or math knowledge for data engineers. I was always terrible at maths. I'm still terrible at math. This is not what I want to focus on. Never what I wanted to focus on. So algorithms, I think if you know the basics, right, the basic math that you learn in school or university, you're absolutely good. You don't need to know very high or specific stuff. So yeah. All right, guys. Last question. I need to go then. I have recently joined a software engineer and work on ETL microservices. Cool. What do you suggest me if I want to move towards data engineering? Keep innovating there. Keep working on that. Microservices is, I'm guessing you're working also with APIs because of microservices and keeping this modular. I don't know how you do the ETL if you do that with Python. That's already a good step. Learn. One thing I recommend you is try to improve your site out, or try to widen your scope of what you're doing currently. What are other people doing around you? How's the setup of the platform around you? That's where you can get more towards the engineer. It's already, I would say this is already an engineering role. But to grow, you need to try to widen your scope and need to try to learn more things. And most likely, this is what your colleagues are doing. So talk with your colleagues, talk with other people in the organization. What are they doing? You don't need to go into details with them, but try to figure out what are they doing and how can you learn these things as well. That's what I recommend for you. All right, 1 hour 14 minutes. Yes. was a great talk. Thanks everybody for being here. If you let me quickly plug my academy here. If you want to get into data engineering, check out my platform, learndataengineering.com, where I have here my data engineering academy. From the basics, the computer science fundamentals, Python fundamentals, through platform and pipeline design with schema design and modern data warehouse and data lakes, fundamental tools like Spark, Kafka, MongoDB, Airflow, Elasticsearch, Docker, up to full end-to-end projects on AWS. I have 2 AWS projects that build up upon each other. Azure project, document streaming with Kafka, Spark, MongoDB, Hadoop, time series databases, and something with Elasticsearch. So if you're interested in that, check out that platform. If you want to know more, what I just released a, that's down here, is Data Engineering for You, a quick start guide for you to, it's a 16-page document that you can download. And also, if you want to get in touch with the community, on the first page here, I have a link to our Discord server where you can join for free our Discord server and become part of the community. Ask me questions there, ask people questions, other people questions there. Yeah. All right. Thanks for being here. That was a great and a fun stream. I actually like that a lot. So see you next week. Have a great weekend, everybody, and the rest of the Friday. See you later.